Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
This is episode 99.
Oh, it's crazy.
This is going to be our post-quarantine Q&A. It's over, folks. Revel in it. You can write us at whattthe, W-H-A-T-T-H-E, at scarythoughts.org. And do you have anything to plug?
No, man. I just, I worked in the marketing mines, so I don't need the people.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
I am going to be playing a show soon. My band with Andy Connors, My Heart and Inverted Flame, will be playing as part of Noise Pop. It'll be a Zum audio showcase, and that'll be at Bottom the Hill on February 22nd, 2022. Join us. It'll be actually our first live performance ever, which is daunting.
I really hope you wear a cloak with a high collar.
It'll be so... It's so done. The cloak thing is so...
I'm not talking like a wizard robe. I'm talking like a Count Chocula sort of thing.
Oh. I'll bounce that off Andy.
Yeah.
All right, so should we just dig in, get straight to question one?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. We got a lot more questions this time around.
Yeah, this might take a while, folks.
Yeah, but I think like to the history of the Q&A, like I think we were just, the reason why we even started doing this was that we were just like breaking it up and thought it would be interesting to check in with people in the moment of the quarantine. I never go back and listen to our episodes, but I listened to a few of the quarantine Q&A episodes. I think this is our third one, right?
I think so.
Yeah, maybe. But it's interesting.
And they've always been framed as part of our Self-Help for Nihilists series.
Yeah.
Although I don't think any of these are particularly self-help oriented.
Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting, like, to hear what we were right about and wrong about with the quarantine. I mean, I think early on we were quite right about like cloth masks being basically bullshit, and it's probably coming from the Wuhan lab.
Yeah.
Which, and then I think in our second one, we were a little bit more cagey about saying that because it was really sensitive.
Yeah.
And now, thanks to our, the liberal hero, Jon Stewart, saying it on television on the Colbert Show, you can no longer be canceled for those dark opinions.
It's amazing.
But yeah, it was interesting, like how careful we got with our language on it. I thought it was a little disappointing.
The world was really agitated.
Yeah.
It was a dangerous time.
Yeah. So I'm not going to be careful with anything anymore.
Great.
Gloves are off, people.
Awesome. And I've already gotten into grad school, so I don't have to...
Oh, congratulations. Which school did you get into?
I'll share it on the next episode.
Okay.
There's some complications.
Okay.
But I'm very excited, and thank you.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really great thing.
Mark's going back to school. It's a very Rodney Dangerfield year.
I'm really excited for you.
Thanks. Thank you. Do you want to read the first question?
Yeah. This one's actually to me. Our listener Henry Groen asks, at one point during the COVID-19 pandemic, Chad, that's me, mentioned that he had stopped reading the news, citing Rolf DeBelly's book. Has Chad continued with this experiment? Was it a purely positive experience, or did you notice any unexpected negative side effects? I would say I have relapsed really hard into the news. I am really all in. All the Joe Rogan stuff really just sucked me right back in, because if there's one thing that just gets my goat, it's hypocrisy at scale. And that news cycle just completely sucked me in. And I'm also sort of like lifelong obsessed with Russia. So this whole World War III thing on the horizon, which is interesting that you can find very little really good reporting about it. It's kind of like, I know everything about Dave Chappelle fighting a housing complex in his neighborhood, but like I still don't quite get why Russia shouldn't just take the Ukraine back.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. Anyway,
you are not being careful about anything.
No. But I would say when I am abstinent from the news, there's no negative effects from it. Like all that happens is you're not up on the dumb thing that your friend tells you, and instead of like knowing more about it than your friend that tells you the stupid thing, you can actually listen to them like they actually have something interesting to say to you. So it's just all good. Like everyone should quit the news. It's terrible.
Agreed.
Like it's so bad for you. Like when people talk about like how they feel better from doing ketamine and mushrooms, like in like, oh, I just feel lighter and happier. That's what not looking in the news does for you.
It's true.
Yeah.
And I think we can attach this sentiment to the episode that we did about Facebook. Mm-hmm. It's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, totally.
It's that it's dopamine hits predicated on absorbing negative anxiety producing information
Yeah.
that you can actually do nothing about. Actually, the very next question is about this subject. So why don't we just read it? Because I actually have even the first question was to you. The second question is to us. It's almost the same one. But from Steve Heiss, we got, Chad, are you still not reading the news? I took your tip and read that book and stopped reading the news last fall, and I'm still not. I sometimes feel confused about a new thing in the news cycle people are talking about, but 99% of the time it doesn't matter at all. Overall, it's great. I feel way less anxious and distracted, so thanks for the recommendation. Keep up the good work. So I don't remember at the time that you sort of pronounced a news fast. You loaned me the book. I had not read it yet, but I feel like my news fast has been more true than, maybe not true, but I've committed to it more than you have. Because
certainly,
despite the Joe Rogan thing, I have noticed anytime you and I have talked about some random thing that's happened lately, you would be so deeply informed and I would have no idea what you were talking about. And I was like, oh, Chad is totally reading the news.
Yeah.
And I really am not.
Yeah, and I can't wait to, like, I usually find that, like, in, like, all addictions, it's helpful to have something to kind of, like, pry yourself away from it a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of, like, I'm still going for 100 novels this year, but I'm using the thing that I'm going to do. Like, basically, I have, like, I need to really round out, like, my classical philosophy stuff. So my plan is in the next few days or weeks to just start just reading Kant and Schopenhauer, like cover to cover, and instead of interacting with this news. And you can't read books like that and have, like, dumb side-eye interests. It's just too distracting. So I'm hoping, I call it the great pretensioning. Like, I'm basically not going to be watching any Netflix or any trash. It's just all heavy-duty shit.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Basically taking on is it St. John's College, St. John University?
Yeah, St. John's. I actually went to visit that college when I was like 17.
I really
wanted to go there, and I just could not afford to go. They were not giving anybody any money for it. And then I remember I stayed there a week, actually.
Holy shit.
And I went to classes and listened in. I was like, oh my God, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And then the woman who was showing me around the whole place was like, once you got out of there, it was like $150,000, even back then in the 90s. Like, it was so expensive.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, what are you going to do after this? And she was like, oh, I think I might run a pawn shop. And I was so horrified that somebody could make an investment like that and just choose to be a loser. Not that owning a pawn shop, but at the time I was like, I knew people who ran pawn shops, like it certainly didn't require a classics education.
Yeah.
And I was so unmoored from it. And then another thing that happened was I went to the dorms and watched a movie. It was like this, like, indie version of a Shakespeare play, but it was fucking terrible, this movie. And everybody was like, oh, yeah, this is great. And I was like, this sucks. And I just walked out, and I decided that I could not go $100,000 into debt for a classics degree. But I really wish I had that education.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I've been trying to chip away at that reading list myself lately. It's tough. Okay. So our friend and friend of the podcast and sometime guest, Jeremy Lassen, wrote a slew of questions. What did you think of season 3 of True Detective? And can you compare it to your experiences of viewing the first season? True Detective seemed groundbreaking in season 1, disappointing in season 2. How did 3 hold up, both when you watched it and in retrospect, now that the franchise isn't front and center culturally, but just one of hundreds of HBO prestige TV products? And in that respect, has your view in hindsight of the first season of True Detective changed? I remember you were both pretty positive about the series. Still feel that way? I actually really liked season 2 of True Detective, and I really liked season 3. I think season 1 is really special. It's a very singular, weird thing. And there's a reason why it has so much cultural significance and why people have attached themselves to it. And it doesn't have cult status, but like it might develop something like that because it's got all these weird intersections with weird fiction and it's just so dark in this singular way. Whereas season 2 and season 3, I thought were just like awesome police procedurals that were like dark and atmospheric. And I hesitate to take anything away from season 2 and 3 just because season 1 was such this anomalous, amazing thing. I don't feel like it's the same kind of trajectory as a show like, let's say, Dexter, where the first season is like fucking incredible and then it just eats shit for 5 more seasons or however long. You know, like a lot of shows, they just die. I don't feel like True Detective died. I feel like it just was really, really good instead of one of the best seasons ever, you know? Yeah, what do you think?
So I still am really stoked on the first season of True Detective. I think it's great. And I think what made it great was the chemistry between Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey. I think they were just like one of the best on-screen cop duos ever. I also think what made that series special was all the stuff that was lifted out of pessimistic philosophy that came out of Russ Cole's mouth. I think that the second and third season, they're just like any other premium mediocre show to me. Like there was just nothing that great about them. I think like the explicitly philosophical tone of the first film or the first series was what was interesting. And I don't care to ever see the show ever again. Yeah.
Your standards for TV are much higher than almost anybody else's at this point.
Man, I just can't do it. Like, I mean, the only type of television
I just watched 7 hours of Reacher in the last 24 hours.
I got like halfway through the first episode and I was like, this is a complete and total waste of my fucking time.
Yeah.
This is terrible. The only series that I can really tolerate on television is like comedy because I think laughing is always kind of good for you.
I like how you're almost creating a metric around what's acceptable TV watching.
Oh man, it's just
well, I do this because it is good for you.
Yeah. I mean, it's always fun to laugh. I think, but like, and I think if you're trying to just do something light, laughing is the best.
You might as well go.
You might as well laugh, you know. But to pretend that you're watching something good, it's just lowering your sensibility of what's good.
Yep.
Yeah,
for sure. Jeremy also asks, has there been any more trends of psychedelic purple movies, Mandy and Color Out of Space style? Any more purple filters in use by current generation of filmmakers that have stood out?
I mean, this to me, like you have to think about like Neon Demon, Drive. Like it is, it's an element of noir filmmaking that's sort of, I think, very much of the moment. And you see it in music like synthwave and retro dark wave, which is like genres that I kind of enjoy. And you hear the soundtracks of these purple films popping up in philosophical podcasts, especially like accelerationist podcasts. You know, it's all William Gibson cyberpunk shit. Like I love it. You know, I think there seems to be this revival of cyberpunk and cybernetic themes in culture right now. And I think it's part of that. And then horror has simply borrowed it. I mean, it's kind of funny. I'm like working on a commercial shoot right now for an insurance product. And the director that we're working with keeps pushing for there to be like neon in this scene. And you're like, you really just like what you're trying to do is just give this Nicholas Winding Refn lighting thing.
Yep.
But you also see like ContraPoints, her channel, for example, uses this type of lighting. I find it very pleasing. I think we'll all probably be very tired of it in the way that we were tired of sepia tone.
Yep.
But for now, it's cool.
I'm curious in how this plays out because, you know, early on in this podcast, I sort of had this idea of aesthetic horror as a category where in the wake of directors like Kubrick's Shining and some of the better Argento movies, a lot of filmmakers were using very highly stylized aesthetics as the centerpiece of conveying horror. So ultra symmetry, garish, highly contrasted colors, that sort of thing. And Mandy and Color Out of Space definitely fell into that for me, along with movies like Neon Demon. But I feel like I'm seeing at least aesthetic horror as the category that it was in my head still being used, but not so aggressively. It's almost kind of just been absorbed into the way horror films are being made. You know, like even Yellow Jackets, which is this sort of like premium mediocre horror adjacent TV series, has these elements of like aestheticized horror. that borders on psychedelic at moments, but it doesn't go all the way. It doesn't go the distance that Mandy does. However, the purple psychedelic thing of Mandy and Color Out of Space, I feel like I haven't seen pretty much any of since Color Out of Space. I think that I'm sure there are other examples, but I haven't seen any.
Yeah. Well, with Mandy, you definitely, it has the feel of smoking the whole pack of cigarettes. You know, like you're like, okay, like it's like once something has, I don't want to say that those things jump the shark, but they're so explicit to what they are. I think also anybody thinking about this question is so deep into this niche that,
Sure.
you know, there's probably like a Super Bowl commercial this weekend that has like purple lighting.
It might.
Yeah, you know.
And then you know it's done. I mean, but also, you know, you were talking about these synthwave genres and things like that. Like those are kind of over. Oh, you know what? Actually, an example of it, now that I think of it, is Boy Harsher, the electronic music duo, just put out a movie. I think you can see it on Amazon Prime, if you remember. I don't remember where it's streaming, but they did a feature film sort of in lieu of a video for one song. And I skimmed through it pretty quickly, and it was sort of adjacent to what we're talking about. So maybe that, but I haven't seen it.
It's kind of funny, like our plant lights we use like a purple tone for part of the day, and it just makes me think of plant lighting now.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. All right. More from Jeremy. Which one of Grady Hendrix's novels should be adapted into a movie, and who would your dream director be? Oh, between the two of us, we've read them all. Yeah. I haven't read Paperbacks from Hell, but that's not really adaptable.
No, that's
an essay.
Yeah, that could easily be like a best of the 90s TV type show. Like,
yeah. Which, all right, sure.
Yeah.
Who would host? Okay, who would host that?
He would, I think. Like he's so
That's true.
fun.
He's a personality.
Yeah, I wouldn't want anybody else. I wouldn't watch it if anybody else. Like they could go like dig up Jordan Peele for it or something. I think it would be lame. Like I think he's so passionate about that project.
Yeah, I think that Grady Hendrix's last novel, Final Girl Support Group, is his best novel by far. And even though it's very complicated, it would probably have to be a TV series, like a limited run. Hopefully it would be over and they wouldn't sprawl it over 4 seasons and let it die. So as far as a showrunner for something like that, maybe Joss Whedon.
Ugh, the worst.
The
Jesus
best.
Christ, that guy.
Killing it, Joss.
I would not like to see any of them adapted.
Great.
Because I think that what's fun about them is that they interact with the book genre that they are. Like, so like the horror store book looks like an IKEA manual. And I think that that's pretty cool. So yeah, I wouldn't be keen to see any of these books adapted.
Actually, although now that you mention it, if Horror Store could be pushed, okay, the way House of Leaves feels as a book, and you could kind of see, was it Kevin Bacon that was in a sort of fake House of Leaves movie that came, I think it was during quarantine, and everybody ignored it because it was really bad and cliched, but it was very exciting for a moment because everybody's like, oh my God, it's a House of Leaves, but it's a movie. If Horror Store could be adapted that way, it could be done really unimaginatively, but Horror Store could be a really interesting movie. There's a lot you could do with space and shadow and architecture and sort of play off of ideas started by Romero about consumerist spaces and horror. I think there's promise there.
For me, if you made like a really scary liminal space movie, Horror Store could be very interesting. Yeah. But it's funny too. So you're like, you almost imagine like if Ryan Reynolds gave it the Free Guy treatment, that would probably be the most successful version of it. But I stand by my decision to not ever want to see any of these films.
Fair. Okay, last question from Jeremy. Why haven't you read My Heart is a Chainsaw yet, and why is it the best horror novel of 2021? Well, okay, so I have not finished it yet. It's actually sitting right there with the dust jacket off because I'm still, quote, in the middle of it, even though I think I put it down 2 months ago. For me, it's got a little bit, we're talking about the Stephen Graham Jones book, My Heart is a Chainsaw. For me, it's got a bit of the Moby Dick factor. The protagonist is completely obsessed with slasher films, and it feels so indulgently repetitive about rolling around in her obsessiveness that I found it really easy to not keep reading, if that makes sense. I'm not criticizing the book at all. I think there's a lot about it that's really strong, but I sort of put it down in the same way that I stopped reading Moby Dick, not because it's bad, but because the repetitive cyclical nature of it was just didn't make me want to pick it back up.
Yeah,
You read the whole thing, right?
Hard as a Chainsaw?
Yeah.
No, I read. I can't remember the line. Well, maybe I did. What's
One Good Indian, or
yeah, I read One Good Indian.
is that what it's called?
And then I own Mongrels, which I read like 20 pages of and didn't read. I think that this class of fiction is not good. Like
Which is
like
what?
just mid-level kind. To me, it's another example of like premium mediocrity. And for me to spend time with a book these days, like I know that I could not in my lifetime read all the really great, exceptional works written. Like if I was really going for it, I couldn't even come close to getting to a percentage of it. So to me, every time I read something mediocre, like some shitty horror novel or some dumb piece of shit, no matter how good it is in its genre, it's taking the space of like a Welbeck novel I haven't read, or like the one or two Mark Twain novels I haven't read. Like there's just so much better actual writing out there that I'm looking, like, especially now as I get older, like I feel death looming. I don't want to waste any time for like lower aesthetics, especially with novels, which is something I feel pretty passionate about. And if I do have time for schlockiness in reading, it's generally science fiction. Like I don't enjoy horror writing at all, like even a little bit. Like as a young person, I liked Stephen King novels. Like I reread Misery recently, and as a writer, I really appreciate like how much that book moves. It's like I think what Stephen King is doing is really exceptional.
I just read my first Stephen King novel since I was 11.
Yeah.
Recently I read The Institute, and it's a long book, and I blasted through it so fast because it was so fun.
Yeah. And there's something like, I don't want to be one of these people like new fiction is bad or anything like that. But this year and the end of last year, I made a big effort to read sort of like well-regarded newer fiction. And I'm not really pleased with almost anything I read. Like the only thing I read that was even like raised my pulse a little bit was My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Mushfegh. I'm reading her short story collection right now, and it's just not good. Like the writing's not good. The ideas are boring. So yeah, I'm getting pretty fucking pretentious about reading, and that's why I'm not going to read any shitty horror.
Yeah.
Yeah. This kind of moves us into this next question from Mary L. What's the difference between retro movies or TV shows like Stranger Things and watching old movies? Is nostalgia tripping better or worse when it's a remake?
I think it's kind of the same at this point. I think that the same capitalist apparatus that is churning through properties that it already has the license to is the same mechanism that churns out things like Stranger Things.
Yeah, there's also that Baudrillard like simulacra thing where it's like a copy of a copy of a copy. Like when you think about something retro like Stranger Things is copying like 80s artifacts, which were copying 50s artifacts. And so as it moves on, it's going to get more diluted, just exactly like making photocopies of something like that. I would say, though, to watch something that's older that was great, I mean, there's the difference between like going back and watching like Blue Velvet and watching The Gate on VHS. Like you're having different experiences, and those are personal experiences. So like I think that's up to you, just how you enjoy your life and want to spend your time. Like that's fine. But I think as far as people who are producing culture and artists who traffic in nostalgia, I think it's a psychic crime, and the people who do it should fucking stop.
Yeah, and I think there is a difference between when we talk. I don't know that we use the word nostalgia so much to talk about great film you experienced when you were younger. It generally talks about just the stuff you were more familiar with. And we tend to be, I'm painting in broad strokes here, but we tend to be nostalgic about things that we absorbed when we were generally too young to be into amazing movies, amazing music, really complicated things. And that's not wholly true, but were you watching Tarkovsky when you were 16? Maybe, Probably not. Did you
No.
watch The Gate when you were 14? Yes.
Yeah.
And so when you're nostalgic for Can't Hardly Wait, it's not about whether it was good or not. It was about that you were the right age at the right time when you saw that teen rom-com. And so I don't know that, I almost feel like Blue Velvet doesn't enter the equation necessarily. Like when I think of Blue Velvet, or when I think of movies that really, that I think like really important, that I also identify with in some way, it's kind of different than nostalgia for me, generally. Yeah, I don't think of Tarkovsky films, even though I saw them when I was youngish. I don't think of them nostalgically the way I think about The Breakfast Club or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's because especially like Kanye West had some statement. He said, like, you just always feel differently about the things that you were into at 13, no matter how good or bad they were.
Yep.
Which I think, I mean, it's so tied into like the idea of coming online. The whole idea, like, of that book I wanted to write about, like 1987, like just films of 1987, is like, that's the first year I really think of myself as having developed like independent aesthetic taste.
Yeah.
And I was like 9. And so I look at that list of films, you know, like Predator, Lethal Weapon, like they're all like really influential. Even other stuff, like I think Mannequin came out that year. There's just films like that, like the bigger films, like really have a heavy weight. And it's not like the films of 1991 were any better or worse, but that particular year really, like I almost dream in those films, you know. And then you have like events in your life, like the Rocky Horror Picture Show will always be associated with like the people I met when I first started going to the Rocky Horror Picture Show, people I'm still really close friends with. Or like, even though I don't really love The Nightmare Before Christmas, I'll always associate it with getting a hand job from my girlfriend in high school while watching it. You know, like that sort of stuff. It's like you have your personal experiences with those things, even if they suck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you read and then passed on to me on Nostalgia by, is it Owen?
I don't know. Who knows?
What did you think of that book?
I really liked it.
Yeah.
I thought it was sort of a lighter read. It was a lighter critical read. And it had some like interesting things I didn't know, that like nostalgia was originally like a condition that you would be diagnosed with. Like soldiers would like have a longing for the homeland, and it was considered so toxic and communicable that you would like bury soldiers who had it. You would like separate them from the rest of the soldiers, otherwise they would stop fighting. And I think that story detail, and that's very early in the book, really made me think about like now it's like people who get so caught up in nostalgia, just repeating things over and over again. Like a person who's really into nostalgia and buying Star Wars shit is not probably going to be able to create great works of art.
Right. I don't know about that. We'll see. I don't know. Yeah. I'm really curious about the way that Adam Curtis, the filmmaker, frames this, because he talks about, a lot of people have brought this to my mind, that the way algorithms tend to work is that they are only looking backwards. The whole thing about using algorithms is to predict future behavior based on past behavior.
Right.
But if we're using algorithms to guide the hand of the population, we are guiding the hand of the population based on previous searches, previous purchases, etc. So what the algorithms are actually doing is keeping you locked in a pattern. This is partly why
they're not predictive at all. They're
not predictive. Yeah. They're about keeping you. This is partly why I'm interested in time loop as a horror, and want to explore that in a future episode of Scary Thoughts, is that where so much is being determined by algorithms are encouraging you to look backwards and to do things you've already done. And so these algorithms are taking these pop cultural remnants and keeping them as fresh and present as possible. Like, you liked that, you'll like this. Well, that's based on what I liked last time you took my temperature.
It's like the Henry Ford thing. Like, if I had given people what they wanted, they would have gotten horses or like a better horse carriage or whatever instead of the car. Like,
But this is the opposite. This is like...
That's what I'm saying. This is the opposite.
I'm sorry.
It's exactly like somebody saying like, let's just keep making horse carriages. Like that's fucking killing.
You like horses?
Yeah, you like horses.
I got horses.
Yeah. Look, here it is. Yeah, I have it in blue and green.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want an NFT of a horse carriage? You don't even need to own it. I've been thinking a lot about this subject, like culturally, the culture mediated by algorithms, because I've been going really deep into AI copywriting technology, because I'm kind of interested. I'm generally interested in like whether or not my career is going to be automated out, you know? And AI copywriting is kind of interesting because you can just type in keywords and it'll spit out like a blog post or some headlines or something like that. And then you can run them. There's these ads called PPC ads, which are like the ones when you do a Google search, there's like the ad related to the thing. That language is really, really highly detailed. And like those words are specifically chosen to match people. So if you're like looking up Princess Leia running shoes, for example, and I'm matching those keywords, a person searching for that term would be more likely to click on my ad. And so you're a more qualified buyer for whatever stupid thing I'm selling. And so the AI copywriting that uses like GPT-3 technology, but it's basically just scouring the internet for combinations of words related to your thing. So it's always looking past. So it's never going to come up with it won't come up with something as groundbreaking as Apple's Think Different. Like it would never be able to come up with that on its own.
Wow,
but it can like do a pretty good job of like describing your products. And I've played around with it a little bit, and it's about as good as like a shitty copywriter is, which is kind of interesting. And I've also become really fascinated with the online world of copywriters, like because you go online and you can find all kinds of really interesting design-oriented stuff. And I think it's because designers have a culture of critique. They go to art school and their shit gets ripped to pieces. And so an okay designer is better than an okay copywriter is. Like an okay copywriter is actually terrible. And copywriters have a culture of like grift. Like they're these like, I'll teach you how to make 6 figures a year being a copywriter. And it's all about like positive mental attitude and like really poorly understood sales psychology. It's really pretty desperate. And then so I've been on the Reddit forum for copywriters, and it's so sad. All those people are going to be replaced by this AI copywriting tools eventually. And then people like me are just going to edit it into like normal stuff. But like, I think like I see it in my own business, like ideas get pitched by agencies that are based on things that have already happened. You're like, this is fucking terrible. Like I want something as innovative as the Dollar Shave Club commercial was originally, you know. Now there's like so many copies of that commercial format. It's pretty sad. Like I just think that like people are pretty fucking trash at coming up with new stuff.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. And which makes me think, I read this book called AI Superpowers, which is about like how America innovates and how China innovates. And I think like, so America, it's like you have a few really smart people come up with something that everybody else just drafts off of it. Whereas in China, and this is mostly technology oriented, this book, in China, like one person will come up with something and then everyone steals it at the same time and hammers it into something like super, like the best version of it. And I don't know which works better, but it seems like, and yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but it seems like looking back is always bad unless you're trying to sell something. I guess that's my point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Cameron Marquez says, my question is, what has been you guys' guiding principles in life? What is it that provokes in you an obligate feeling towards corporeality? None of us have to be here, yet we all persist. Why? And is why mutable? I feel like I should have really thought about this one a lot in advance.
Yeah, this is a pretty heavy-duty question.
It's a pretty tough one.
And I mean, this is just existentialist philosophy cues in a very tidy package. For me, like I mostly just don't want to die painfully and alone, like, you know, and old. And like, so a lot of my things that I do, like I think that book, The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker was really influential to me. Like you just do all this stuff, like it's ultimately not going to matter. So you want to just, you're sort of almost entertaining yourself and protecting yourself from the worst possible outcomes of living in this world. And then, you know, the philosophical question of like, why shouldn't you just kill yourself since life is mostly pain for everyone? It was never really satisfactorily answered by anybody. And I think the only reason why I haven't done my suicide by cop is just like, some vestigial fear of there being an afterlife.
I feel like I'm going through my life where I don't have enough time to do all the things that I want to do, or periodically enough energy to do the things I want to do. It's not like I'm maximizing every day to its fullest. And I think that drive to read more books, watch more movies, learn about cool things from my friends, make more art, connect with interesting people is so time consuming that I don't really have time to think much about death.
Well, that's the denial of death thing.
Yeah,
Like
it's
using it to deny
beautiful
death.
distraction.
Yeah.
And I don't have kids, so I don't have that as an out, as a way to sort of think about existing past death in any way. Like obviously as an artist, there's a little bit of some part of me will survive in artifacts, but ultimately like this is it. This genetic material stops here. But obligate feeling towards corporality. So I feel pretty strongly not in an atheism that this is it, but that what's beyond this is as of yet totally unknowable. I have a really hard time looking at any religion or philosophy that purports to know what happens after death. They all seem pretty scattershot and idiosyncratic and ridiculous to me.
Yeah,
And
the only thing I know for sure is that anybody who says they know is a liar.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not committed to believing that there's nothing. I'm committed to trying not to be deceived by people who believe that they know, which is super complicated because that sort of belief system runs through almost everything in the history of humanity. Like there are and have been more believers than non-believers by far.
Yeah.
And to have some sort of argument against that, I recognize is completely preposterous. You can't argue with a believer, nor you can't even disagree with it. It's just a fundamental. There's no meeting in the middle. Even there's not even a conversation. You can argue the details and you can catch people on their bullshit about their own beliefs, but ultimately a belief is a belief. And the more we know about the belief, the more we know that they are fairly unchangeable. The core ones. It's really hard to shake someone's core belief system.
I also I don't really like attacking people's like belief systems like that because you don't really know what that shit's holding back. Like I think a lot of people, like for a good example would be people in AA, like you're maintaining sobriety based on your belief in the supernatural order. I would rather you do that than be on heroin.
Yep.
Like that. And I think that there's lesser degrees of that all over. But I also like the sort of like Aleister Crowleyan idea that the best thing to do is to create and build your own religion and live it. But you have to take it seriously. Like you have to build you can't just be like, Mercury's in retrograde right now and this quartz crystals, I'm really feeling it. Like it's not about like a hodgepodge system of whatever, whenever. It's about like you have to like have like a core system. And I remember the one that kind of guides me, but I haven't been great at lately because I've been so boring, is I was sleeping with this girl who was from a really rich family, like right when I first moved to San Francisco. And I went to like her uncle's house. And her uncle's like one of these super rich guys who's like so rich that their moralities were divorced from normal thinking. And I think this is a lot of what goes on with like your like Jeffrey Epstein level rich people is like, I think they do worship weird dark gods in a way, not in the way that we probably think, but like I think that this sort of thing happens. But I was fucking hammered on like mushrooms and weed, and we're all hanging out and at this like basically in a state. And at one point I'm like wearing like a zebra skin rug around me and like standing on top of a piano. It was like a super wild night. And this guy looked at me like it was like in this chaotic night. He looked and he says, "Always live as if you were entertaining the gods. And the moment they get bored with you, you will cease to exist." And I was like, holy shit. And I was kind of living like that at the time. And it was kind of a high mark of my life. I was like, this is great. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately, is we have all been displeasing the gods by ordering DoorDash and watching Netflix. And they are going to be angry with us and they're going to forget us.
That's really dark.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Next.
Sorry, it's super dark. I do kind of believe it, like, to be honest. This question comes from Nathan Thompson from the Escaping Samsara podcast, which is great. If you're a yoga person, like, this podcast is pretty phenomenal. I still don't know why he had us on. Like, he has like such really high level yogis, but if you were on a Star Trek style voyage to outer space, what 5 Disney characters would you take as your crew and why? Pixar not allowed. Now, I love these kind of questions because they're sci-fi what ifs, and they also invite litigiousness. So he specifically excludes Pixar movies,
which makes it harder for me.
Which it makes it harder, but by having an exclusion, he's implying things that aren't excluded or allowed. So the simple answer to this is just pick some Star Wars shit because Disney owns Star Wars.
Yeah.
But I think that is aesthetically unpleasing.
Yeah.
So, and because I'm a classicist and I believe Walt Disney was a greater visionary than George Lucas, I'm going with the core 5 Disney characters: Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse, Donald Duck, Pluto, and Goofy.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, you could go the concubine route. And just grab 5 princesses.
I thought about that too.
I know you did.
Yeah.
And I mean, I like your answer, but you might want to, okay, you're on a voyage to outer space. So I guess, is the crew a bunch of people you want to hang with? Is this your Scooby gang? Or are you trying to accomplish something? Because your answer sounds fun, but not if there's an objective, like Goofy and, did you say Pluto?
Yeah. Why do you need 2 dogs?
Yeah. Well, neither of them can accomplish much. Like, that would be like inviting Wile E. Coyote. Like, you're just asking for failure.
I think Star Trek style voyage implies, and this is a callback to our appearance on his podcast, that you're in search for big titty green aliens.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I think that you're doing Star Trek shit. Boldly seek out and explore new worlds. I am introducing cartoon chaos to those worlds. I am an agent of chaos in my model. Like, as Salvador Dali said, Walt Disney was the great American surrealist, and I'm introducing that level of disassociation to the universe. That's my goal.
You could grab all the evil queens.
I thought about that too.
Because they'd be, you'd get shit done. You'd also have to watch your back.
Yeah.
I would say the Frozen sisters, because they have superpowers, or one of them. Both? No, one of them does. Both? Holy shit.
I haven't
seen Frozen in a while.
Yeah,
you should see Frozen. It's really great.
No.
But I'm also recommending something I can't remember, something very fundamental about. Frozen sisters, they seem fun.
You could have Ursula in a tank, just like the Spice Guild navigators in David Lynch's Dune.
Jesus. I'm pretty bad with Disney characters.
I mean, if you're going evil magic user, Maleficent is an obvious example, but you want the Angelina Jolie version because of the hotness. You could go with Merlin if you were just going for magic users.
Sure.
There's the queen from Snow White, also a magic user.
Robin Hood's good with a bow and arrow. I don't know. I'm not good at this one.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
sorry. I think even if I prepared a good answer, it wouldn't necessarily even be that good.
Well, there's just like, it's like, are you trying to do a gamification version of it, or are you just trying to have fun?
Yeah.
And I'm going with fun, like evil fascist Morty. Let's just have fun adventures.
Yeah. All right. Grant asks, have either of you ever tried a coffee enema?
I have not. Taking it the usual way works just fine.
Yeah. Never done it.
I've never even done a normal enema. It seems gross to me.
Me neither. I mean, totally. But at the same time, like, you don't know what's going to happen to your body in the next however many years. Could be right around the corner for either of us.
Yeah. I don't know about that.
Sorry, Grant.
This is from Plastic Cheapies. And he has 2 questions, but one of them is directed to me. It's, you learned TM, Transcendental Meditation, during lockdown. If so, how did learning it affect your experience of lockdown and all the attendant mayhem, if at all? Well, as anyone listens to this podcast knows, I love David Lynch, and he's my favorite. And one of the things he talks most passionately about is transcendental meditation. So I always wanted to try it. And because I work on a lot of mindfulness content at work, I was able to get my job to sort of like pay for the course, which is at my income level, like $900 to $1,000. They do a sliding scale. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it had been like $1,000 for me to learn it. And that's a lot of money, man. And I had sort of don't love any of the transcendental meditation books. Like I've read the Maharishi. They all read like top of funnel sales white papers. It's like no matter what your problem is, transcendental meditation has the answer. And I also had not ever liked meditating at all. So, but for some reason I got it into my head that I was going to stop smoking weed on my birthday and get into transcendental meditation. Basically, you trade one addiction for another. And I have really enjoyed it. I've done it twice a day, every single day since September 6th. And I don't think it's like earth-changing, but it certainly seems to take the edge off a little bit. Like I didn't have as nearly as bad time in my first month off weed as I usually do. I find that overall, I feel like I might actually be a little bit more creative in my writing, especially at work. And then the biggest thing I've noticed is my dreams are way more vibrant, longer, memorable, and feel as if they've been directed by somebody different. Like it's just a totally different experience. So, and I like things I like about transcendental meditation is you never need to interact with the organization ever again. And I think the organization's kind of corny, to be honest. And when you look into the stuff like their flying yoga, which is a bunch of Moby looking dudes like jumping up and down on pillows, it just looks fucking ridiculous.
Sounds great.
Yeah. There's I can't remember the name of it, but some Swedish guy decided to like take the transcendental meditation techniques and like completely divorce it from Indian mysticism. I think that would probably work just as well for people. Like I could give a single fuck about the Maharishi or Indian gods or any of that. I actually do quite like Indian mythology, but as far as like the people who run the organization, I don't care at all. But I think having done the course was good because it sort of gives you like a demarcation line and there's a little ceremony that you do. So I guess thumbs up. What about you? You have meditation that you do.
Yeah, mine is, well, if I may, sorry, if I can just put a little dig at you.
Yeah.
I was so on board with everything you said, but you did include the part of it that helped you with work. And I was like, oh, I wish you didn't say that because we're in such this moment of like using mindfulness techniques as a way to get ahead in business.
So I'm really glad that you said that because I think it's really fair to say that. There's a book I'm reading, I've been reading on and off called Mindfulness. And it's all about the idea that you sit down and do all these mindfulness techniques and the ultimate goal is to simply be more efficient at work. And I think that is terrible. Like people who talk about like microdosing LSD and mushrooms so that they can become more efficient in their job. I can't think of anything more disgusting than that. It's just gross. Like you're going to use these like super fun engines of chaos to like work on an Excel spreadsheet. Like what the fuck is wrong with you? And so but at the same time, like my job is like writing. So I have to be sort of creative on behalf of the giant company I work for. And it's almost like I have more ideas for that. So I don't have to spend as much time thinking hard about it. So it's freed up creative space in my brain. But I think, yeah, the whole idea that you're going to like use an app to become calmer so that you can be a less squeaky wheel in this giant threshing machine is fucking terrible. And I do like, it is actually, may actually have divorced me a little bit from work. Like, so the last thing I do, like when I quit working for the day, I do my second meditation. And it feels like a really nice turn off from working. Like I don't look at emails or anything like that. Like my wife, she's on all the time and it's depressed because of it. But yeah, you're right. You're right to call that out.
I've had a meditation practice since I was a tween, which I know is very unusual. It has bounced around a lot. It's completely my own. I've definitely taken from all sorts of different practices over the years. I mean, because I've been doing it for so long, I've just cumulatively like adopted this and adopted that. And it's just sort of, it is a hodgepodge. You know, I live in California, so anything that borders on spiritual is destined to be a hodgepodge, right?
Yeah.
Although something changed recently, you're going to love this. I finally broke down and am using Sam Harris's mindfulness app, his Waking Up app. So I'm one of those people who I sort of love Sam Harris and have issues with him. And I don't mean like, oh, I have political issues with him, which, you know, we all do. He's got a very specific point of view. But I think I actually talked about this on Escaping Samsara podcast. the idea of having the same voice, Sam Harris's voice, who will on his podcast go down these rabbit holes of complaining about someone said something on Twitter, like, and these incredibly painful intellectual spiraling moments that he has, to then have that same voice be in your head and helping you be guided into a mindfulness practice, I just found absurd. Like, of all voices, I don't think I can use his. But to his credit, the sessions on the app are fantastic. Like, he introduces sessions with really interesting philosophical concepts and really opens up meditations with ideas that really resonate with me. And so I've found I've just kind of been able to get over this is the same guy who does this other thing, because the quality of his app is incredibly high. He also just added a lot of Alan Watts lectures, like a lot. And that's really exciting. So anyway, just like a mindfulness practice has been this like long evolving project for me that has just at fundamental, like, can't imagine my life without it. It has everything to do with who I am. And through, like, I wouldn't even say like it helped me through the pandemic, because like, yeah, it helped me through everything, you know?
Yeah.
And I've said this before, sorry, one last thing is, the times when I've been at my worst are the times when I have been furthest from meditation.
Yeah. I kind of want to, like, it's interesting. I wanted to like try just not doing it for 2 weeks just to see how it would feel and then get back to it. But I'm also such like I love the idea that David Lynch says he's never missed a session since he started in the 70s.
That's
and
amazing.
So I kind of want to like do the same thing.
Yeah.
So it would just like never miss.
Yeah.
But it's funny, like you talking about Sam Harris's guided meditation, I realized that like I might actually be a fundamentalist TM person, because to me with meditation, the idea is like you're trying to get to, one of the things I like about it is you're getting to this transcendent beyond you state, which I know, like, who knows, like, how do you actually get out of your brain? It's like how do you know what like being like male or female feels like? You don't really know, right? Like maybe you're just imagining this state. But I feel like if your goal was to get to a super state of some sort, having somebody's voice and a prompt question is different. Like I feel like if you were to do like the Ram Dass style Ram meditation, I think it produces it's like the difference between experiencing like drone music or like a very story driven Will Smith hip hop song. It's like,
right.
There's just a different thing happening to your brain.
Sure.
I don't know what would be better or worse. I
feel like for me, I'm like trying this out for a while. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I've always been interested in trying TM, and maybe if they give student discounts, now's my chance.
You could probably, there's always a way around paying for something. Always. You know, you just have to be wily. You know, you just got to get your raccoon brain on. What I like about transcendental meditation also is it has the Henry Rollins 200 pounds is always 200 pounds thing. It's sort of like, it's always like, it's a metric for, you know, you're always going back to the same thing over and over and over again. So you can, it's sort of like, is a more function. It's in a way, it's almost more scientific. Like you with this stable control, you can know how you're feeling. And I've had like really like bizarre, blissful experiences. Nothing I would say is mystical at all. But what I like about it is it's not explicitly mystical. You know?
Yeah.
I think there's another question. Another question from Plastic Sheepies is, what are your favorite podcasts? What about you?
I never miss Criminal. Mm-hmm. She brings a really interesting way of approaching. It's a very This American Life approach to true crime that I appreciate, especially because so many true crime podcasts are really prurient and really like edgelord driven. Mm-hmm. I love How Did This Get Made? I think I've listened to every episode at least twice. What else? Let me just look at my phone while you answer. What have I been like? This is like the question of like, what are your favorite albums from the last year? Like, I don't know. I kind of got to look at my phone to answer that one.
What's kind of interesting about the age of the app is you can actually go get like hard detail. Like you might want to think like, oh, I've been listening to all this crazy Frank Zappa shit, but like you really just been listening to like My Chemical Romance over and over again.
Exactly. I really like Acid Horizon. It's a
I listen to that podcast.
It's all right
too. Yeah,
they have some interesting people.
Their artwork, they're like alternate covers for books, are really good.
I haven't seen those.
Oh man, just go to their Instagram page, like Acid Horizon Pod, I think is what it is.
Yeah.
But they do like really interesting, cool covers for like George Bataille's The Eye, or like I think whoever does that artwork is really smart and really interesting. They've hitched their wagon to Zero Books.
Yes,
Which
the new Zero books.
The new Zero books, which I think is the old Zero books, sort of. Yeah, like I've like purposely completely.
It's like Game of Thrones over there.
Yeah. I just never want to know anything about the internal organization of Zero books. I have to say, like, I've read a lot of Zero books, and I've been very displeased with a lot of them because I think they're just really tough to read because the prose is bad. But I kind of started reading more of the stuff that sort of came like Mark Fisher's work and the stuff that's most immediately associated with his work.
Yes.
And I think that stuff is quite good.
Yeah.
Like I thought like the book about 4chan that there were, I think All Normies Must Die, or whatever, like that book was fucking terrible.
Oh, really?
I just didn't like it very much. I felt like it was like...
Did you feel slighted?
No. I just felt it was like Michael Malice's book on the New Right was a little bit, I think, better. It'd be almost like if you had two ape primatologists and one of them got a little bit closer to the apes and observed a little bit more. Like I think that would be the difference between those two things. But of course, then you risk getting ape shit all over yourself, which is sort of like what Michael Malice is a little too close, I would think, maybe. But I like Acid Horizon Pod.
Along the similar lines, Partially Examined Life. I quite like.
A classic. Yeah, those guys are St. John's alums. I think if you were like a person who did not have the means to go back to college but wanted to study philosophy, you could read along with them starting from episode 1 and have a really, really great foundational philosophical education.
Yeah. I also really like I Never Miss a 20,000 Hertz, which is like an audio podcast. But it's about like some audio phenomenon in the world, like about some recurring sound clip or some sound phenomenon we all take for granted, and it dissects it. And similar imaginary worlds, which is another sort of like it takes a thing that exists in sci-fi, fantasy, and horror and dissects it for a while. That one's really good. I think those are the ones I never miss.
Yeah, I've really tuned down the amount of podcasts I've listened to recently.
Yeah.
Because I don't have as much of a commute. And I've been listening more books, audio books, I think. Like has been more of a focus for me.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of a loyalist to friends. I like supporting my friends. So I listen to the Overlook podcast. Yeah. The Overlook Hour quite frequently.
Race Trader.
Yeah, Race Trader. My buddy Adisa Banjoko that does Bishop Chronicles, he has sort of like a hip hop martial arts related like positive mental attitude podcast. I listen to that, and I listen to the stuff that Nick the Tooth does, like Infinite Worlds podcast. But not every episode for any of those guys. Usually it's like something like if I haven't seen any of the movies that the Overlook Hour podcast is talking about, I probably won't listen to that episode. But if it's an episode where I've seen the film, I always like to kind of hear what they have to say because they're real fans, and I appreciate that they have they do a film fest, like they're really doing it. I think that's pretty cool. And there's a bunch of podcasts that I'm just not going to listen to that are like really spicy and dark that they're just not to be talked about on air.
God. Tell me later. I've also been really enjoying my friend Christine Murray produced a podcast called A Frame of Mind, which is about the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art, which is a museum in the middle of Kansas City. And there are all these conversations around race happening at that museum. And she and her host talk mostly to the community and the people at the museum about what's happening at the museum, the legacy that it has, what people think of the museum. And it's actually really fascinating because, obviously if you're in the art world and are invested in museums, there are a lot of conversations about what a museum is happening right now, reconsidering it, recontextualizing it, trying to preserve the relevance, trying to overthrow them and undermine them. It's a really chaotic situation, the way it is for virtually every other institution in America right now. And the way that this podcast approaches this one particular museum is really far more compelling look at what's happening in museums and why and how they exist in America, to me, in a far more compelling way than reading another angry article in the New York Times about, some bullshit that happened at the Whitney or something.
Yeah. Oh, a podcast I really like that is new to me is Love and Light Confessionals. And I post about it on Instagram. They had this woman, Katja Weiss Anderson. She's sort of, I guess, has some sort of history in like the new age, natural foods sort of stuff. But she has like an expose podcast where she like does like, she did an episode about surviving Susan Weed. And Susan,
I listened to that. It was great.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, like, I think on balance, new age shit is as toxic as backwoods Baptist shit. I think it's really bad for people. I think that it cloaks itself in female empowerment a lot. I think it is largely hucksters and hoaxsters and MLM. And at the very worst, you're selling some herbs that aren't that like toxic, but at the worst, like there are these cults that absorb people, steal all their money and destroy lives. And her podcast is just about that space. Like if you're really annoyed by some, like you see people like, oh my God, Mercury's in retrograde and let me sell you my tarot services or whatever. Like on one level, you're like, okay, it's just entertainment, but it does get pretty dark. Like people like, oh, I'll pay, you pay me $5,000 and I'll lift this curse off of you and shit. Like that stuff is there. And I think because it has such a friendly face, like for example, like Michelle T, her tarot thing is adjacent to this, but obviously not toxic in this way. You know what I mean? And I think for something like that she's doing, it's really fun, but it gets muddled in the middle. You know what I mean? In the way that like you might like the Christianity of Cornel West, but it's sort of in the same neighborhood of the Christianity of the Texas megachurches. It's using the same modes. And this podcast, Love and Light Confessionals, it just really goes in, and you can tell she's doing a good job because people are mad. She has an episode about Whole Foods that I thought was pretty good. I wish I had known she was doing it because I could have said a whole lot about it. She has a homeopathy episode. If you believe in homeopathy, you're a fucking moron. Like I'll just say it right now. I'm sorry if it upsets you, but you're an idiot. And just holistic pseudoscience diets and 12. I mean, it's a great podcast, and there's a pretty good backlog to go through. Yeah. If you're not totally into vocal fry, it's a little tough.
Yeah, someone I know who is currently in the next room couldn't get into it because of the vocal fry, and I didn't even notice the vocal fry. So
it's too much Red Scare. You listen to too much Red Scare.
Can't
you get
do Red Scare.
To it.
Can't do it.
Yeah, I love it.
I know you do. Eric D wrote, "How do you feel about the popularity of corporate murder podcasts?" So we could read this as murder podcasts by corporations or podcasts about corporate murder.
Yeah. So if you're talking about something about Elizabeth Holmes, I'm all in.
Go for it.
I mean, I find the whole idea,
the more the merrier.
The dark side of the lean in female CEO is absolutely fascinating. And I find those women to be unbelievably attractive for some reason. Like, I don't know why, what it is. It's just so weird. But her and that woman that got caught up in the Bitcoin heist recently, like her and her husband stole $3.5 billion, and she's like some sort of autistic rapper. Because I work in Silicon Valley, basically. Yeah. It's really interesting to me because I've seen lesser versions of these things happen. Like people who are like really cringily into hip hop, but they care about B2B SaaS. I mean, it's just like I'm very attracted to it because it's very close to home in the way that I think if you were an engineer and you watch Silicon Valley, you might like that. But as far as the whole like two gals gab about reading Wikipedia articles about famous murder cases, I just don't care. I mean, to me, in some ways, it's like, I think my favorite murder, it's kind of like our show, right? The murder is just the avenue for these two people to talk and you have a parasocial relationship with them and that stuff's fine. I mean, you could just always watch First 48 or something like that. Like, murder's interesting. There seems to be we should have just done a murder show instead of horror. Like we actually maybe have a career.
Sorry if we let you down, listeners.
Yeah. I don't know. People like it. Like, I think it's a really easy formula. I mean, how many like murder TV shows are there,
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you? How do you feel? I feel like I just monopolized
that
question.
Well, I mean, what podcast do I like? I like Criminal, and I don't know how corporate it actually is.
Super corporate.
Yeah. Well, there. I love it. I think it's great. And what's funny is actually when you arrived to record today, I was in the middle of listening to an episode of My Favorite Murder that Phoebe Judge from Criminal is on. So it's kind of what's it called when in a comic book when there's a crossover issue?
It's a crossover, I believe.
I nailed it. Didn't even know it.
I think the term you might be thinking of now is a collab.
That's not what I was thinking of.
Like content collab. That's probably more what they were doing.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah.
I never want to hear those words
Hey, man, it's again. The parlance of our times.
I don't like our times.
Fair.
Jay from Race Trader. Hey, Jay. We're actually going to be on an episode, speaking of David Lynch, we're going to be on an upcoming Race Trader episode as part of their White History Month.
They like the concept of the show and the name of the show is so good. I mean, if you're not familiar with it, Jay is white, Boston is black. They talk about black films and they kind of have a similar vibe to us where they don't rip on each other and they just have what lesser minds would have really like chaotic conversations. You know what I mean? Like you could get really shitty about the type of conversations they have, but they just take black film and discuss it. And for February, they do White Film History Month. It's so fucking funny to me. Like the name of the podcast is great. I think if you like our show, you would probably really enjoy their show.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And we're going to be on an upcoming episode about, is it Mulholland Drive?
Mulholland Drive.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
Yeah, I can't wait.
So, you had a lot of questions. Okay. When do each of you find is the best time for yourselves to read each day? I read first thing in the morning. I wake up before I've even had coffee now. Yeah, I think coffee is literally eating a hole in the center of my cavity. So I'm putting it after food now, and it seems to be doing a lot better. And I pretty much at this point only like just black coffee. So I don't think black coffee on an empty stomach is a good long-term plan. Yeah, I wake up and I mostly, because I'm still a little muddy in the head, been mostly just reading fiction. Like I wake up and read fiction for 30 to 60 minutes before I do anything.
I have 30 ounces at least of coffee black on an empty stomach every single day.
Yeah, I used to.
Yeah.
Kinda.
Yeah.
No mas.
Because I get so much just pleasure from reading, I just kind of read whenever I can. Like in Stephen King's On Writing, he talks about like just always having a book with you. And that's kind of how I am. Like I definitely read in the morning. I do most of my reading in the evening once I've like done everything. Like to me, just to read deep into the night is pretty enjoyable for me. And then I just read throughout the day. Like I usually have a book of short stories, a nonfiction book, and then a full novel going. And I just read all the time.
Yeah. I also recently discovered, I can't believe it took me so long to hop on this train, but now a lot of my reading is from the public library via the Libby app that throws it to my Kindle.
Yeah.
So I just
really
always
useful.
have my Kindle on me. And when I'm at work, I can, just rip through a couple of pages, but I just always have my Kindle. And yeah, it's kind of nice. I mean, it's pretty evil because it uses Amazon as a way to replace bookstores ultimately, but I use it, it's the public library. It's a service they provide.
Yeah. I find that like, I've really come around to the Kindle in the last year or two, like for, because it's like for $5, you can get the entire Kant library.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then great. Like, yeah, I guess it is sort of evil because it helps Bezos go have orgies in space or whatever. But at the same time, you can read all these classic books at such a reduced price that it's potential that you could help foment the next revolution and bring him to the guillotine. So it's kind of a mixed bag.
Yeah. There's a slight irony in my approach to reading lately too, because I just recently bought this incredibly beautiful reissue of Octavia Butler's Fledgling. Comes in a box. And I also just bought the new John Darnielle Devil House in hardback, and both of them I'm like, I should download them to my Kindle so I don't mess up these beautiful editions.
Oh my God, I'm like the same way.
Okay.
I think, I totally am guilty of wanting to do the same thing. Speaking of limited editions, this publisher put out a very special limited, like super crazy binding version of Blood Meridian that has a foreword by Bret Easton Ellis.
Oh.
And you cannot get the foreword anywhere except for in the book.
Brilliant.
And it's driving me fucking crazy. And it's like,
how much is it?
I missed it to buy for $1,000, which I wish I had bought it. Now it's on eBay for a minimum of like $1,700.
Totally worth it.
If I was not in the middle of my stupid fucking home remodel,
yeah,
I would own this motherfucker because it's going to be worth like $4,000 in 2 years. I mean, it's like, it's pretty easy to see what books are going to be valuable. in long term.
Sure.
Like I've made like some considerably good investments recently in the last 2 years. But yeah.
This one's to you, so I'll read it. It's also from Jay. Chad, I know you've mentioned that you're working on a book and or screenplay. What writing habits have you locked in that you find are the most sufficient and rewarding?
My personal writing is just really suffering. Like I sit down and write a little bit every day. I find like it's been really slow going on that stuff. But because I write for a living, my habits are quite good on that front. And I find that just all of Cal Newport's books were really useful for me. Like a lot of like if you're talking about like getting yourself more efficient for the workplace or whatever, his whole concept of being able to do deep work, I think is really important. You just don't look at anything. And I think you need to cultivate a little bit of boredom. Like if you find yourself starting to get bored and itchy, that's a good time to write, in my opinion. Like, cause your brain is going to produce something to keep it like creative. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. As far as like my own personal writing, this is a big fail. So yeah. Moving on.
Ouch.
As a musician, Mark, and as an actual this is the big one, and as an actual Joe Rogan Experience podcast listener, Chad, what are both of your takes on the Spotify Joe Rogan thing? My take is essentially fuck Spotify, of course, but the way Rogan is being demonized by the left, which I can believe primarily consists of people who've never listened to an episode of this podcast, is really disheartening. Not that Rogan is beyond reproach. He deserves to be criticized, but it's just the way it's being framed as this black and white thing that makes me fucking sad. And although this story isn't the most important thing going on right now, according to CNN, you would think it was, I believe this is pretty representational of the issue with a lot of what's going on in American rhetoric. And then he has a video, which is from Breaking Points, which is Crystal Ball breaking down the whole thing. I really kind of quite agree with Crystal Ball. And if you go look for that video. But the Joe Rogan thing is why I have been sucked back into the news. So it's kind of a big deal to me. And we were talking off mic about how if you've ever been close to a story that the news covers, you will see how poorly covered it is. Like, you know, you say your friend was in a drunk driving accident or something, or you know somebody in a criminal case. CNN fucking sucks, man. I mean, so I guess there's a bunch of parts to this.
What do you think of what happened to Joe Rogan? CNN sucks.
Well, so that's part of it. So I'm an old school fan of Joe Rogan. And to me, I come to him through the UFC. And to me, the very early days of the Joe Rogan Experience, back when they were like doing the Fleshlight and stuff like that as the sponsor, it's crazy to me to think that those people having those conversations would have major cultural input right now. Like it's wild to me. And I think that the Joe Rogan Experience show, it's not the news. Like, and the people who think it's the news or that like Spotify can like make him have a timeout or whatever, it's a different thing. It's like a long form conversation. I think it's fair to think that like Joe Rogan might not be your cup of tea. He's a normie meathead. You know what I mean? They got into weed. And like the interesting thing about him from like a countercultural point of view is he like does psychedelics like that, which is now ruined by Michael Pollan and those types. But yeah, it's just crazy, like having listened to enough of that show to see how incorrect the framing of all this stuff is. Not even as like, oh, I'm a fan, but it's like, oh, you're clearly lying about this.
I think that a key thing to Joe Rogan, and I think a key to his success, is that he will talk to anybody.
Yeah.
He will have anybody on his show, and I don't mean low standards. I mean wide standards.
Anyone he thinks would be interesting to talk to. That's the metric.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And what it is so frustrating to see that is being framed at that he platforms and then fill in the blank. You know, whoever your least favorite people are, just find a list of awful people he's had on the podcast and say that this is the type of person he platforms. Yeah. When in fact he platforms fucking everything.
Yeah. Really interesting people. Like I made this joke on Facebook where I was like, whatever negative harm him having the most credentialed person ever in vaccines on, like maybe you don't agree with what that guy said, but no one is getting vaccinated. Well, I'll get back to this point, but no one's really getting vaccinated or not vaccinated because of the Joe Rogan show. But the knees over toes guy, like that's saving people's fucking knees. So like over time, I think like listening to the Joe Rogan show will have a positive net health effect. You know, like, yeah, it's like, and people also forget, like everybody's in this like, oh, weed's great for you and it'll cure COVID and all this shit. Like he was one of the first major celebrities to be on the pro legalization kick at a time when it was like not cool, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so frustrating to me. It makes me crazy because you see like CNN just like full of shit lying.
Oh,
and
yeah.
like just like the whole thing, like with the way ivermectin was covered, like it just drives me crazy. Like, cause it's just not true. Like I get like super Asperger about like lies, especially.
Yeah, it's frustrating because, I mean, personally, I think his whole take on COVID is at worst pretty fucked. That's my take on it. But he has had a lot more people saying a lot more really interesting things about it than almost anybody.
Yeah.
So
there's also
so my opinion about his opinion is really not relevant.
Yeah, there's also the media economy around it. Like, so he has that guy, I can't remember his name, like Dr. Malone or whatever, the guy who's like the most controversial about the mRNA vaccine stuff. That guy, he has him on for 3 hours, and that allows for breaking points to have a 30-minute rebuttal to him.
Right.
You know, like, whereas if it was CNN, they would either get him on there and like make fun of him for 2 minutes and throw him off, or Fox News would say like, this guy's right. And like, you would never even know what was going on. Like, you don't even understand what his position on it is. Like, I didn't even know what an mRNA vaccine was until I listened to that podcast. And I think at the end of it, I felt pretty reaffirmed in my decision to get the vaccine, you know? And then some other podcaster, I think Bridget Fetisi, did sort of a Twitter poll, and she was like, okay, well, she was like, has he made you want the vaccine, not want the vaccine? You know, did you get it? Did you not get it? And it was basically like almost the same number of people, an extremely small number of people were moved one way or the other. Everybody else had already decided for themselves before they saw that podcast. And you could say, oh, that's just a Twitter poll, but it has like 200,000 people answering it. So like a psychology study would be fucking tits over moon, like to have that many people participate. Yeah. So I think it's like what is the harm here? The only harm is if you are a deep state backed media company trying to maintain your grips on control. Like those are the people who are scared.
Totally. That's the thing is, you know, my saying, I disagree strongly with a lot of what he has to say about COVID. Mm-hmm. I disagree more strongly with people lying about what he said about it.
Yes.
And especially there is incredible danger in lying, but there's also incredible danger in being an institution that people look to for truth. Mm-hmm. And the problem is not only deceiving people, but then doing so in such an arrogant, brazen way that is transparent. Yeah. And so it is continuing the erosion of people's trust in major news outlets.
Which I think is fucking great. I say pedal to the floor on that.
I'm divided.
Yeah.
Part of me feels that way, and part of me feels that the idea that there are institutions that have within them a system of checks and balances that keeps people aspiring to higher ethical goals, that people are credentialed in positive ways, that there are repercussions for lying and failing, and something like what we would hope the New York Times is at its best, for example, which it is not.
It's always been full of shit, though. Like, you can go back to the 30s and hear, like, you can go read the coverage of the Soviet Union that they put out, where it was like, it's a fucking paradise while people were starving to death. You know, and this is not an anti-commie thing. I don't care one way. I think like a good communist regime is probably just as good as a good capitalist regime. It's just like, how well is something run? You know, I kind of don't really care. Just make sure the trains show up.
Yeah.
But, you know, like this idea that there was a glory days or a good old days of the news is not true. Like, we've never really had a true fourth estate that checked power until now. Like, now you get to have, like, the Snowden revelations would not have happened in the ecosystem of CNN. It could not and would not have happened. If there is some sort of, and I'm not saying there is at all, but say there was a problem with this vaccine and made people like go crazy or whatever, some totally science fiction thing, you're not going to hear it from CNN. Like, it's just not, they like when every single commercial they have is Pfizer, 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 you know. But I think, you know, the one thing that people should be thinking about those, like, the accusations of like Joe Rogan's racism. And I think like when you look at that smash cut of him saying the N-word, I think there's two things going on there. Like, one is he for sure said it and it for sure looks bad. And there's a certain type of person who thinks that they get a pass on it. Like, I'm just going to quote it, or I'm so down that I can say it or whatever. Like, and I think that that's an arrogance. And to me, like, there's no recordings of me saying that word because I'm pretty fucking careful about it, And I think there's also, in the way that you wouldn't like make fun of somebody's cleft lip, I feel like there's just like standards, like I feel like it would bum my friends out who are black if I was just dropping N-bombs around. So therefore I'm not going to. Like, and I think the idea that some words are special for some people is fine. I think that's fine. And then the joke he told, the Planet of the Apes joke, I remember I listened to that when that episode came out. Like, it's for sure a racist joke. He was basically talking there, but they're also high as shit, which doesn't like excuse it. But I've heard some wild shit come out of every single type of friend I have's mouth, like all the time. Like, I've heard from like black friends the most insane Zionist conspiracy theory shit to like straight, like, so like nobody is like not saying terrible shit when they're fucked up. Like, but the difference is like having CNN like try to like shut your whole operation down because it's weird, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, I don't know, like I'm not trying to excuse any level of racism or anything like that, but I think like you have to understand like, why does that get such like a focus?
It's weird. Actually, my good friend Sam Harris brought this up on a recent podcast. Yeah. He did an entire podcast where he just spoke about this Joe Rogan thing. And one of the things he pointed out is like, look at all of the people of color Joe Rogan has had on his show
that love him.
Look at it.
Like Israel Adesanya, who just won this weekend at UFC, shout out. Like, he was like, took the mic at the UFC presser when some journalist was asking a Joe Rogan question. He's like, this is the most honest dude. And I think like...
And the people who are trying to smear him are clearly being dishonest. So too, if the framing is Joe Rogan shouldn't have used this word, that's one thing. But that is not really what's being leveraged. What's being leveraged is we need to take Joe Rogan down. Let's frame him as a racist and let's erase the history he has of supporting people of color. And what's also very confounding is, look, all the shit came up. He came out and apologized. Like a level, legitimate, thoughtful apology. And typical of the time we live in, Trump thought he shouldn't have apologized. Oh my God.
Yeah.
And then two, it almost, you could almost read it as like, it made it worse. It made people even hate him more.
Well, I mean, it's interesting.
Because contrition doesn't matter anymore.
Well, I think when you like I listen to a lot of Joe Rogan, and I'm not like, I'm obviously sounding like I'm blowing him here on this whole segment here. But like, I feel like I've listened to enough of that show to have a real opinion about it. It's like people who like complain about Marxism but have never read any Marx. You know what I mean? It's like, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. You just don't. And I think with like the Joe Rogan stuff, it's like, do you think he's a bad person? Like, no one who knows him has anything negatives to say about him. And he has like a really wide group of friends. And if you look at the people like giving him the thumbs up and whatever, it's great people. It's like champion UFC fighters, like really important, thoughtful PhD people, fucking Buck Angel, like, so it's like, how can you have like such a diverse group of people and your own experience of listening to it? Like, how can you believe Brian Stelter, a dude who like carried water for like the fucking molesting Cuomo brothers, that like he'd helped cover up thousands of deaths in old folks' homes. And like, I don't want to get into whataboutism, but it's like, CNN was the purveyor of weapons of mass destruction in the Iraq War. Hundreds of thousands of people died because of that bullshit. I'd seriously doubt anyone has died because of listening to the Joe Rogan Experience.
This also makes me think of a recent Matt Taibbi article where he's talking about people in power who don't realize when the power is slipping through their hands.
Yeah.
He's mostly talking about Trudeau's treatment of the truckers, where he just seems to have no grip that it is a popular movement.
Prime Minister Blackface himself.
Yeah. And this feels like a similar gesture happening where corporate news is slowly eating shit, and they're going to they're not trying to take on Jay Leno, right? Someone who is incredibly popular, but nobody feels an affinity for.
Jay Leno's their employee. That's the difference.
Oh, well, okay, fair.
Yeah.
But I was more thinking of someone who has a big megaphone but isn't saying much, and people don't feel an affinity. There aren't people who are into Jay Leno, but you have millions of people who are really into Joe Rogan for a reason, and it's not a minority. It's not a fringe thing, and they are harming themselves by thinking they can take on this person who has the biggest podcast in the history of civilization, and people who are deeply dedicated to him across the spectrum,
and really quality people. Like the people who tend to be like Joe Rogan fans are kind of, they're doing jujitsu, they're successful. And the other thing is, like, you can go look at the demographics of the show because it's advertising. You can go see what the demo makeup is because they want you to know it. It's really diverse, man. It's Asian, Black, white, like different age groups. It has a really wide age group spread. There's that meme, like, I don't care about anything that only men like. Sorry, there's like 35% of the audience is female. Like, I mean, it's pretty crazy. Like, football doesn't have that, I
think trying to take on, okay, let me articulate this well, but that gender thing made me think of it.
Yeah.
Because it does remind me of when people leveled all these accusations during the election, the first Trump win, the first Trump win, as opposed to the second Trump win.
The one that's coming in 2024.
Yeah, sorry. But I think that there were legitimate leveling accusations of misogyny and racism at him. I do not hesitate to throw those words at that parasite, but to ignore the fact that his base had a lot of people of color in it for a reason, a lot of women for a reason, and to pretend that those reasons don't exist are at your own peril, and the peril is that you lost the fucking election because you weren't paying attention, because you were so horrified at what you perceived was going on that you didn't want to know the truth. And I think that's partly what's happening here. Like, you're going to take Joe Rogan on? Good fucking luck. You're trying to score points, which this is all a social media game ultimately. People are trying to score points. You're going to lose points. You're going to come out lower. And I'm not trying to prop up Joe Rogan by saying that. I'm just sort of like, look at your fight. You're entering a battleground that you don't understand.
They don't understand it at all. Like, that's like, like Whoopi Goldberg got suspended for 2 weeks, and everybody's like, well, let's just suspend Joe Rogan from Spotify. He's not an employee of Spotify. Yeah. And I fucking love Whoopi Goldberg. And look, she could not have been more wrong about her assessment of the Jews. Like, she's just complete. But you know what? She's on a show that's about just talking, and she was wrong. You say, here's how you were wrong. You don't here's time out for being wrong. That's fucking crazy. Like, how do you learn anything? And then to talk about misinformation, Jesus Christ, The View is like one of the biggest vectors of misinformation in America. They routinely 10 and 100x the numbers of like COVID cases and deaths. Like, it's pretty crazy. Like, they were very wrong about it all the time. Yeah, it's pretty wild. And I think
you sure know a lot about The View for someone who doesn't read the news.
Well, it's all the Joe Rogan thing. I think since for the last 3 weeks, I've been hitting that fucking news crack pipe pretty hard. Speaking of Biden crack pipes, how awesome is that?
What?
Do you know about that story? This is another example, right? Like, once you start pulling this thread of just like how fucked up the news is. So harm reduction is a thing that the government supports, drug harm reduction. And so
I don't know how much they actually support it, but okay.
Well, to me, like, you need to round people up, throw them in camps, and get them into programs. I think giving people like needles on the street, it's like the science behind it is really not there. Like, I've read about this quite a bit.
Well, clean needles also doesn't protect you from fentanyl, so that's an old strategy.
So there's this whole thing. So they have safe smoking kits, and in the safe smoking kits, some of them were crack pipes. And so Biden's government is literally buying crack pipes for people. And the thing that's funny is like Jen Psaki, the woman who's the mouthpiece for Biden, was like, well, we don't know that this actually happened. We do know that happens because I was watching a story about the Tenderloin here, and there was a woman who's a harm reduction person, and she's handing stuff out, and there's clearly a crack pipe in it. So it's like, she might not have gotten money from the government, but in a safe smoking kit, what do you think is in it? Like,
Yeah.
it's not like only tinfoil, you know what I mean? Which is unsafe because of the aluminum. So, like, if you're going to smoke meth, the safest way to do it is in a clean glass pipe. So if that's what your harm reduction, but they're like basically like, oh, we never said that. So then Snopes ran a whole article, fact checking Snopes, and they declared the story mostly false. But like, it's true. Like, you could just easily look it up. It's not so much that like Joe Rogan is right, or like these other organizations are right, or like Jimmy Dore is right. It's that CNN is so wrong. And then the people in that group are so wrong. Or like they just go back to the same well too. Like this is my last bit on this, but like Stacey Abrams, she's a politician from Georgia. I don't know anything about Georgia politics, but I know she was pretty all in on little kids have to have masks on. I don't know if little kids should wear masks or not. I don't have kids, so I don't think about them. But there's a photo op of her, no mask, in front of a bunch of little kids. She is an older, overweight person. She's the most at-risk person in the photo. No mask. And they put it up on her social media, and immediately people go after it because that's the world we live in. They take it down, Streisand effect, right? So now everybody worries about it. What she comes back with is basically saying like, oh, bad acting political actors are attacking this Martin Luther King Day event. You're like, what are you talking about? Like, we're making fun of you in the same way we made fun of Gavin Newsom at the French Laundry. There's nothing racial about this at all. You're just a person in power who doesn't follow the rules you want everyone to follow. And like that hypocrisy, I think is the thing that like really gets people. It certainly gets me. Like, I get so fucking fired up about it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, let's move on from Joe Rogan.
All right. This is also from Jay.
Thanks, Jay, for fucking our podcast up.
Recently heard your episode on Black Christmas, which I finally saw this past weekend and was blown away. In regards to your historic perspective on the slasher and point of view and the point of view camera thing, I've always considered Hitchcock's Psycho to be the first slasher, although some nerds claim Peeping Tom to be the first, but they were both essentially made at the same time, and Psycho made a bigger impact. However, Peeping Tom also uses the point of view of the killer idea. Would you guys ever be interested in covering Psycho? Or is it one of those movies that has been covered to death already? The covered to death thing kind of comes up to me. For me, I feel like I don't want to cover The Shining and Psycho and some things that are just really, really big. And for me, it's a little bit of, I don't know how much I have to contribute to a conversation about.
Same. I think the best I could do is read the 2 Hitchcock books that I have and then tell you about that. I think pieces, not that I don't want to ever talk about like really big pieces of art. I just feel like Psycho, I don't know what I could add to that conversation.
Although who knows, in like a month, you and I might be in the middle of a...
Also, think about what our show is. Our show is me and you watching these things and our conversation about it. So would our conversation about Psycho be interesting to people who like hearing us talk about things? Probably. I just,
that's fair.
I mean, it's definitely on there. And as to like when the first thing was X, that's always a problem. Like when was
I think
the first sci-fi?
It's always fun and it's always a dead end. Both.
Yeah. And it's like, I always really like when you learn about something or even a new perspective, like with that conversation about like, I can't remember who they said was the first sci-fi person, but it like completely eliminated Mary Shelley from the running, who was like beat it by like 100 years.
Yeah.
Like I was like, oh yeah. And then I looked into it more and then I started thinking about something I'd never thought of, which is the idea that Vedic religious texts are sort of sci-fi.
Right.
And I was like, oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So I like thinking about that stuff quite a bit.
All right.
Here's another question from him. He says, I remember Chad discussing David Foster Wallace. Would you ever consider doing an episode of Self-Help for Nihilists on Wallace? I'd definitely be down to be a guest on that. Although I'm not an expert, I've read the majority of his work and would love to speak on it with the likes of you gents, or just hear you two discuss. Well, I would say David Foster Wallace's essay about David Lynch is for sure coming up on our podcast episode with you guys from Mulholland Drive. So if you want to talk to us about David Foster Wallace, it's for sure happening. It's another DFW is another thing. Like I'm a fan, and I feel like people have written books that are longer than Infinite Jest, breaking down Infinite Jest. So like, what am I going to do?
Right?
Yeah.
Alexander Cormier writes, Hi, fellows. I love your show. I'm looking for recommendations of novels from the 21st century. What are some of your favorites?
This is a tough one, man. I thought about this question quite a bit, and I have not enjoyed very much from the 21st century so far. It's been like some obvious things like Cormac McCarthy's The Road.
Is that 21st century?
Yeah. Anything after 2000.
I thought that was written in like the 80s.
No. It's new. Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, The Road. I'm sorry.
Blood
you
Meridian
said
is
The Road and I
1985.
heard Blood Meridian.
Yeah, it's
The Road, totally.
Yeah,
it's great.
So that would be a pick of mine. I think Michelle Houellebecq's books are interesting. The sort of stuff like Jonathan Franzen's Corrections, that's an interesting book. But there's this whole argument that the form of the novel is sort of past. And I kind of agree. Like, I think that, like,
I think it's like talking about rock and roll in a sense. Not
yeah,
exactly, but
yeah.
like it's a really great form, but it's not necessarily past its prime, but the like frenetic energy of what the possibilities are, it's going to take a lot for that to return to it somehow.
I was thinking about, like, is there a book that has... So I read books that weren't written in the 21st century recently that have really shifted my opinions on things and, like, sort of like... And in that way, I'd say changed my life, right? I can't think of any books from the 21st century that I've had that experience with. And certainly like this whole slate of like new autofiction, like the 21st century, like, I mean, the question specifically about the novel, the 21st century to me is very much about the memoir and autofiction. So I think there are things that you could point to in that genre, like Maggie Nelson.
Faux Queen by Monique Jenkinson.
Yeah, perfect example. So it becomes like... But for all that stuff...
But I'm sorry, I interrupted. Maggie Nelson is incredible.
Yeah, but
Argonauts is amazing.
Yeah, and it's doing something that feels sort of new. But I feel like a YouTube channel does that game better.
Huh.
You know? Like, I would rather watch ContraPoints than read ContraPoints' book, if that makes sense.
I hear that.
Yeah.
I really liked... Was it Time Traveler's Wife? When was that written?
Earlier. I thought about that
really?
book too.
Fuck,
Yeah, it was
I love that
in the
book
90s.
so much.
Yeah.
I just read Life After Life by Kate Atkinson and really, really liked it. It primarily takes place during World War II and takes on some of the literary conceits of that era. I loved it. I thought it was so fucking well written and absorbing and dynamic. And I'll be bringing it up in the whole concept of the time loop because it sort of overlaps with that. But that was a book I really, really liked.
Yeah. There's a bunch of stuff, like stuff too, that though I haven't really read. Like, you know, people really love 2666, that Robert Bolano book. I haven't read. There's like a lot of stuff.
Finish it.
There's just a lot of stuff I haven't read. You know, I really liked Never Let Me Go.
What's that?
It's that book by Kazuo Ishiguro. It's basically about like, it's a pretty haunting book. It's organ harvesting has become a thing. And then the way they do it is they like, if I'm rich, I just have a clone of myself grow up. And these clones are basically kept at boarding schools. And they just have their own little lives. And eventually their parts get harvested. And so they have these meaningless lives, but they have these relationships with each other that are like, it's a great book. Have
you seen the movie The Island?
It has island vibes.
Yeah.
There's definitely a thing like that. Yeah, I know it's for someone who reads as much as I do, that's probably like a pretty unsatisfying answer.
I know it's not a novel, but in terms of fiction, Ted Chiang's 2 books I think are as good they're as good as writing will ever get.
For sci-fi, for sure.
I think in general.
I'd say they stand up to anything outside their genre, but I'd also say that they're so far ahead in the genre.
Yep. They're like up against Borges in terms of just like what.
I totally agree.
Yeah. I'm staring at my bookcase trying to glean. When was Fledgling actually written? By Octavia Butler.
I don't know. You know what? I'm going to come down as much as I like Octavia Butler.
Yeah.
Not worth all the hype in general.
Oh.
I know.
She's staring down at you from that artwork with heavy consternation.
I think of her almost in the same vein as like Stephen King, sort of like not like not ever going to be part of the, like you would have to be playing some silly games to put a Stephen King book into like a Western canon. And I feel the same way about Octavia Butler.
Ouch.
But like, but a book like Beloved, I would for sure put into the Western canon.
I couldn't read it.
Just the writing is just so much more like
the writing is amazing, but I could not connect with that at all.
Lord Battle. Yeah, Russell Fisher from the Overlook Hour. Like, yeah, definitely listen to the Overlook Hour if you're like a Bay Area type. Like, it's like a fun hang podcast. You know, I want to go on their show and hang out with them one day. How healthy is our post-pandemic culture in the Bay Area, and will people ever stop driving solo with a mask? Oh my God. I'm asking as someone who's mourned the death of several theaters, film programs in the past 2 years. I think the Bay Area is fucked, dude. Like, I mean, you'd have to be out of your mind to open up a movie theater. And like, the idea of like opening up a movie theater where you can get like Nashville hot wing chicken fingers or whatever, like the Alamo, I fucking hate seeing movies with people eating. Like, it just bums me out. I think it's probably going to be a thing in the past. There might be like the Roxy will survive, but I think like middle level theaters, it's either going to be like you sit in a giant recliner with the sound system that shakes your bones, or you go sit with homeless people at the Roxy. Like, probably no in between.
Yeah. I mourn the idea of, you know, we're in a sense losing the Castro Theater, which I think is a real bummer. But there goes around the question that everybody asks when some radical thing, cultural element falls apart, which is, yeah, but when was the last time you actually went to the Castro and saw a movie? And pretty much almost everybody, so I work in a bar, and my bar is the type of place where people come in and complain about gentrification and things like that. And there has been a lot of people complaining about the Castro Theater, essentially going over to a major entertainment corporation that is going to turn it into another place where like Fleet Foxes can play or some shit. And it's a bummer. I think the Castro is incredible, and seeing movies there is a wonderful thing. But I have to admit to myself that, pandemic notwithstanding, I don't go to the Castro that much because I'm not invested in the cinematic experience so much. And really, I mean, I know I don't have the biggest TV in the world. It is pretty fucking big.
Yeah, it's
and like
pretty insane.
It satisfies a lot of my desire to see large scale cinema.
Yeah.
And I think there's something really magical about seeing something really big with bone shaking sound system in place. But I also really don't like audiences. Movie audiences
Same.
are the worst.
Yeah.
And I've had, I'd say, of the last 6 times I was at the Alamo Draft House, which is a theater chain that has a no talking policy, 5 of those times, the person sitting right next to me was having a conversation at the level I'm talking to you now. And one of the times I flagged one of the servers, like, because they're like,
You
if
raised
you have
the
a problem,
Karen flag.
I raised the Karen flag, and the person came, looked at the note, walked away, and that server never came back again. So I'm kind of like, so even a place that has rules in place about annoying chatter doesn't, at least in my experience, doesn't even seem to curb it in the least.
Yeah. When I was at my most film snobby, I worked at a movie theater, like a landmark theater in New Orleans. And I got ruined to the experience of watching films with like 2 people after work.
Yeah.
And just where you have no mouth breathers and you're able to smoke cigarettes and do drugs and watch, Lost Highway on a huge screen with no one else in it.
That sounds great.
Yeah. You just can't get that. Like, there's fucking teenagers about, they ruin everything.
Yeah. The first time I went to the theater post-pandemic, Andy Connors and I went and saw F9, and we were, I think, the only people in a very large theater with big, gorgeous armchairs and a huge sound system and all that. But it was F9, which is a legitimately awful movie. So, I don't know.
One of the reasons why I liked Titan so much or Titan, or however you say it, was I was the only person in the theater at like a big megaplex, and it was loud.
Yeah,
it was
that's
really
good.
Pretty fun. And the last thing I'll say about this is there was a time when people who were dedicated to vaudeville complained about movies ruining vaudeville.
Right.
And I think it's just going to be the same. Like, there'll be something that comes along that will replace it.
Can't keep selling horses.
Yeah, you can't keep selling horses.
Would you guys ever consider screening a film, doing a live cast? Well, my birthday's coming up, and I was ironically I don't think I'm going to do the birthday party that we've been talking about for the last year. Maybe you can describe it.
Yeah, Monique, Mark's wife, and I were going to throw a corporate event for Mark's birthday with like keynote addresses and like business casual and name tag laminates, and we were going to have it in some sort of like really awful liminal space. Just really basically do like a B2B SaaS style birthday party, and it was. I don't know, man. We should do something like that eventually.
At some point, it just seems like it's such a good idea that we can't let it pass up. But I think actually what I'm going to do is maybe like rent out the Little Roxy Theater and screen Clueless or something like that.
Oh, super fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, in that contest, it's just us and we've all seen it and we can talk, we can hang out. Like it's Clueless for God's sake. Like we can talk during Clueless. It's fine.
Yeah. It's almost in the vein of getting one of those karaoke rooms that you sing
Yeah,
in.
exactly.
Yeah. As far as like performing the podcast, we did it once and I really didn't enjoy it. Like I thought like Jeremy Laston was on it with us, Megan Elison. I think it was like a really, like they were great. I just felt so uncomfortable like performing the podcast in front of people. And I don't like live podcasts. Like whenever I watch them or listen to them, there's just something, it's not what I came for, you know, and it felt like there was like a pressure to be on, you know, and I'm not a fan for me. You know?
It's funny. I appreciate what you're saying. I find that one of my favorite podcasts is How Did This Get Made? And the best episodes are the live one. I mean, they're doing a specific thing, but it's funny. It's the inverse of what you're saying. Like actually because it's a comedy podcast in this certain style, the degree to which it gets amped up by an audience really affects the quality of the episode.
I could see if we had a large audience and it was like a raucous affair, that would be different, you know?
Right. I'd be afraid that it would just provoke you to say worse shit. If you had an audience that appreciated,
totally
like
would
push you to go further.
Yeah.
That's a horror of mine.
Yeah, it would be pretty awesome. I feel like I get a lot of affirmation in the emails and comments.
Yeah, I know.
Like, I
feel like I spent so much effort trying to be a good person. You don't, but people seem to like... People seem to take to your whole thing more than me.
Yeah, no, people's parents do too. That's the funniest thing.
Oh, God, don't understand it. Oh, speaking of which, this is awesome. Can you read it?
Oh, yeah. So speaking of, Mark, what's the worst thing Chad said that you had to cut?
I can't remember offhand because my memory doesn't work so well in that way. Oftentimes we do sort of say, can you cut that? Or I'll say, I'm just going to cut that. Like if we go down some rabbit hole that...
If it's inarticulate, usually it's not because it's so spicy. It's just because like the point being made is so clumsy.
Totally.
Yeah.
There have been a couple of times where it's been like, it's been content based. And I'll be honest, I think it's more often been me than you. Like I will want to cut out my own content and I don't, and that's possibly because kind of what we were just joking about a moment ago. I'm more uptight about saying what I deem as the wrong thing. But I think there have been times where I've like said something really like not for publication.
When you bottle it up so much, when it comes out, it just sounds
it's
a little
really
harsh.
Uncomfortable.
Yeah. Whereas I think I like wallow around in my thoughts so much that I feel pretty comfortable with somebody knowing it. And the only thing I can think of that I've asked you to cut out is like I might have said something about work. Like I might say like, oh, and it's not like I'm talking shit about somebody. It's just like maybe borderline NDA stuff, where I'm just like not thinking. And then later on I'm like, oh, I actually don't want to talk about that.
Yep.
And part of it's like, I'm actually pretty careful with what I say. Like you're never going to find a tape of me like saying the N-word or where, like I've just always
there's no Joe Rogan style supercut of Chad
there
saying
really
awful
isn't.
things. There isn't.
Because I'm paranoid, I've always felt that at all times the government is listening through phones and in secret, like for real. Like it's a kind of like a sci-fi paranoia that I've like really taken into myself. And I feel like I don't ever want to give anybody like real ammo against me or something like that. And, it's like I could say all kinds of raw shit about working in tech and working in marketing, but I would never, because this podcast is never going to support me financially like that. So, I think it's like where like the people get in these meetings at work and they want to like argue about the vaccine or like, that white people aren't really racist or whatever. Just shut the fuck up, dude. You're not winning this conversation. Like just shut up and just enjoy life and like help people where you can. And, like.
No, totally. And, I work in a bar. It's a really good conduit for people to want to come and air their political grievances or whatever. And although I have pretty strong opinions about a lot of things, I also sort of feel like It's a nice day. You have a cocktail in front of you. Why don't you just chill the fuck out?
Yeah.
Like, don't try to get me agitated about the shit that you're anxious about.
Well, people certainly want to draft you into the culture war at all times, you know?
All times.
And to me, like Ernst Younger has this concept of a character called the anarch, which is like it's not really an anarchist, but it's somebody who like disappears into the woods to live the better life while everybody else is concerned about fucking nonsense. And that is like, it has an analog in William Burroughs' concept of the Johnson, kind of, except for the Johnson is more of like a parasite on the broader culture. The anarch is sort of more of like, while everybody else is like concerned about whatever, you go get your Aragon on and like sort of abdicate responsibility for like a greater mythological life. And I think that that's the way to go.
It's beautiful.
You know, especially because I don't have children. You know what I mean? I've chosen to sort of like abdicate responsibility for things. And like, what are you want me to come in and give you my like hot take on like how many black people are in Star Wars? I mean, it's fucking, what do you want from me? You know?
Yeah. All right. Next question. Why'd y'all ignore my pleas for a Scary Thoughts episode on The Empty Man? So I literally had this queued up to watch last night. This is terrible. I had it queued up to watch last night because I got home from work early and it's like sunny outside. It's horror movie time. And I ended up watching Reacher instead. Oh, I just sort of really want.
That's my point.
I actually, no, totally. But I actually really wanted to just fucking shut off.
Yeah.
Like I was pretty tired and didn't have the capacity for something that might actually be good. Mm-hmm. It's been on my radar, perhaps because of you, Lord Battle. I don't remember how it came up first, but it's in my queue and it's coming soon. As an episode, I'm going to assume that I would have to like it enough to say to Chad that we should cover it.
Yeah, I have no memory of this. So, like, I don't know what the movie is.
Okay.
So I would actually prefer not to know. So if you decide, if you give it a thumbs up, I want to go into it cold.
Okay. So I guess this is our last question, yeah?
Sure. This is from Terry. What have you been listening to lately?
What have you been listening to lately?
You know, I listen to, most of the time I listen to music. The job of the music is to drown out what is going on around me in my house. So my wife, my dogs, whatever. So, but lately I've been listening to a lot of like kind of synthwave stuff. There's this label on Bandcamp called Love Crypt. And it's sort of like slightly gothier, but not turbo cyber goth, like Drive movie soundtrack stuff. But it all seems to have like your band has this sort of like, they'll have titles like Sounds of Darkness before realizing that it is all a lie. Or something like that, you know. So it seems to be like a little bit more. There's probably some sort of mission statement underneath it or whatever. But with Bandcamp, if they don't fill it out, who knows? You know?
Right.
And there's like an endless number of albums on there. I don't know if it's like they're different bands. I don't know. Like I don't really know how Bandcamp works. Kind of like the UX.
Sometimes people leave it intentionally blurry.
It feels like that might be the case, but that stuff it doesn't have the like retromania feel of some of like the synthwave stuff on YouTube. It feels a lot more like intentional, like it could be a soundtrack or something like that.
Yeah.
That and then I listened to there's a couple jazz bands I like neo jazz, like Ghost Note and The Comet Is Coming. They feel very like apocalyptic jazz.
Yeah.
And then there's this New Zealand singer-songwriter that I kind of like recently discovered named Marlon Williams, who I really like. Kind of has like a Morrissey meets Roy Orbison sort of vibe. So that's pretty much it. Like, and I listen to your band a bit when I want to like really tune things out.
Thanks. Thankfully, I work in a bar where I can choose the music, and I have a couple of playlists that I rotate through. One of them is like pure 80s synth pop. Mm-hmm. Most of it obscure. Another's a very like obscure post-punk from any era. So I'm constantly listening to that kind of thing, though not listening. I also have a Bluetooth speaker in my bathroom, so I always remember the Splash Dance. Mm-hmm. It's like my Splash Dance playlist, but it's entirely Zymox, Ixmal Deutschland, Bauhaus,
For Joy taking Division, a bath?
Shower, yeah. Every day I take a shower while like goth and death rock play. It's just Chelsea Wolfe. Like it's sort of just how it.
So you like just feel like you're getting ready to go out to the club? Is that
kind of?
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Which I know all of that I know is conceding, while earlier in this episode we were bad-mouthing nostalgia. That is all music from, my teen and tween years, mostly. I do really like Chelsea Wolfe and Emma Ruth Rundle. I've also been really into this artist who's only on Bandcamp called Mount. I don't know who he, she, they are. It kind of sounds like someone has a guitar feeding back in a cistern. It's very like, it just barely graces the edge of being music.
Oh,
and it's pretty interesting.
Your recitation of pronouns reminded me of something I wanted to run by you. You know the pronoun zer.
Yeah,
So my punk rock band name, the Zirkle Jerks.
that's great.
Yeah, pretty good, right? Yeah.
Super into that. Yeah. Monique and I were just at a Dina Martina performance a few weeks ago, and she opened with the song "It's Raining Them." It was so beautiful.
That's like kind of like where I'd like things to get, where it's like it's not like people going, "Whoa, you want us to call you that?" It's like no, it's here, it's part of our culture, and now it can be ridiculed at the same level as everybody else. Like not meanly, just like
let's just make it fun.
Yeah, let's
whatever
make
it
fun.
takes.
Yeah, like I mean, it's very easy to look at libs of TikTok and see people having their fucking meltdowns because they have no personality of their own and they've adopted this sort of weird ideology in the middle of nowhere. Like it's very easy to make fun of that. But at the same time, I really like the idea of having agency and autonomy over your own identity in a way that is like not easily fit into culture.
Yeah.
Like I think it's kind of, like fuck, all we had was like Mohawks.
Oh, totally. Oh, I think one other just music related thing that I've kind of really loved, and I don't know if it is evergreen for me, is I discovered kind of late dry cleaning, which is sort of like if Nico talked over Sonic Youth or The Fall or something like that. It's pretty rad. It's like this really interesting band. It's sort of like if Savages had an incredibly restrained vocalist instead of what's her name at the mic. Yeah, so much music. I don't fucking know. Also, my bandmate Andy Connors inundates me with the weirdest black metal, so I'm often like sort of drowning in that buzz.
It's so interesting. I just don't get it, man. I never want to listen to. We talked about this on the black metal episode. Like, there's never a time when I think I'll put this on, with one exception. Liturgy. I love that
Liturgy's
band.
incredible.
Like I listen to that band all the time. And I think I like, as much as I like sometimes I think sort of try to fly this like proletariat flag in my tastes. I really only listen to totally bizarre experimental music like regularly. Like it's, I'll always be like Wu-Tang and Misfits for life. But I mean mostly Liturgy these days as over the Misfits,
Yeah. I also find doom metal is really good for climbing when I go to the gym.
Yeah, that
just
makes
something
sense.
Like it's aggressive, so it's kind of good for the workout aspect, but it's also a drone, so it doesn't actually keep you from being able to work the puzzle out.
I like listening to depressing war memoirs when I'm climbing.
That's amazing.
I find it sort of motivating because you're like, oh, if I was being shot at by the Mujahideen, would I be able to get up over this thing? Like, I don't know.
Yeah,
it's like
sort of like cliffhangers happening in your head.
Or also like, oh, this is so hard. Is it really?
Yeah.
I'm climbing in this giant Nerf environment. I'm like, oh, what have I achieved today? Like, nothing.
Amazing.
Yeah. Well, that's all the questions. I mean, I feel
that was a lot.
Yeah, that was longer than I thought. I mean, hopefully people have stuck with us. Probably people have just stuck with us to hear if their question has been answered.
Yeah.
And it has.
And you guys just feel free to send questions whenever, actually. Just whenever the fancy takes you.
Unless it is, have you seen X Netflix thing? Just no.
Because Mark has and Chad hasn't.
Mark has
There's
seen
your
it.
answer.
I have not seen it. Mark was displeased with it overall.
Yeah.
And I think it's ruining culture.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of...
Mark keeps trying, despite all evidence to the contrary.
So you watched all of Reacher?
I have one more episode.
Yeah. I just.
It's really dumb, but it's very fun.
Is it?
Yeah.
I couldn't
I'm
get,
not recommending it though.
yeah, I couldn't get past the first episode. I was really shut down by it. I mean, it was just, you know what it is? It's just like, it's like Rambo with Columbo,
Yeah.
you know,
Fully.
like,
Yeah.
it's like, I don't know. It's just,
Although I will give it one thing. You know, we've talked about the issue of Arnold Schwarzenegger being in movies as a normal person and not, you know, people don't never address it. That actually comes up on How Did This Get Made as well. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger will play this dad who will just like walk into a room and people won't completely freak out that he's twice the size of every human in the room, right?
Yeah.
Is at least in Reacher, when he walks down the street, everybody stops and looks at him because he's the Hulk. If you see the Hulk coming down the street, even if he's not green, you turn your head.
Yeah, and look, for sure, it's a silly TV show, and these characters are basically superheroes or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
But like whenever I see somebody like that, I just think of like the restrictive diet and amount of time in the gym it takes to look like that.
A lot.
You know, like
And chemicals.
Yeah, and like just totally
Of
like
dubious legality.
it's like you're telling me you got off the bus with a toothbrush and you didn't have a fucking suitcase full of like Trenbolone and D-ball and stuff.
Oh,
like, yeah,
interesting.
yeah. It's like you just wander the earth that size. I mean, it's kind of like
Yeah, and also not once in this series does he go like, "Yeah, I got to go work out."
right. And obviously, look, I mean, like we don't need, but at least like
Where's the nearest gym and GNC?
oh yeah, you got to go to your fucking TRT doctor for what the guy's got going on.
Fair.
But I don't know, man. It's just I think I've been watching too much More Plates, More Dates, like just to really understand what it takes to do that, and also being sort of like on my own journey with it too. You know?
Oh, more plates, more dates. I just got it.
Yeah,
I've heard you say that title before, but I never understood it until just now. That's pretty cute.
yeah. It's kind of funny. He talks about that as branding, as like when he was just a bro on YouTube, just having fun. He thought that was funny. And now he wishes it was something different as he's become more knowledgeable and become basically a real expert. He's like, well, I have this stupid name,
Yeah.
but I can't change it now.
Right.
So he's just stuck with More Plates, More Dates, which is a solid mission statement, I think.
It's not bad.
Yeah. That's it.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Word.